I am delighted to have you join us for today's discussion. I'm Jane Lewis. I'm currently chair-elect of the Women's Fund, and I look forward to chairing the fund beginning in September. As a signature program of the Austin Community Foundation, the Women's Fund is a giving network committed to improving the lives of Central Texas women and their families. Our members know that gender matters where economic security is concerned. We also know that race matters. And so it is through the lens of this critical intersection, race and gender, that we focus our attention. Women of color in our community are disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Existing barriers to economic security have only been exacerbated as women find it even harder to secure affordable housing and support services, to invest in education as a pathway out of poverty, to access the health care they need, and they find it even more difficult to access reliable and quality child care, essential to their ability to work, which is the topic of today's conversation. I know that many of you out there served on the grants committee this past spring, and as the pandemic unfolded with catastrophic effects to our community, we responded with a quick process change, allocating more capital, tripling the number of nonprofits we expected to fund, making flexible grants for operating support, and speeding up our timeline so nonprofits received our funding more quickly. This quick shift demonstrates the fact that our funding practices are not static, but fluid. And when we have the will, the need, and the cause, the Women's Fund is a dynamic philanthropic vehicle equipped for a rapid response. So with that in mind, I'm excited to share with you an overview of what the Women's Fund Steering Committee has been working on since last spring. First of all, thanks to membership feedback and with sensitivity to the widespread hardship many in our community are experiencing, we know this is not the year for special events. We want 100% of your philanthropic dollars to go out in support of our community. For the last 4 years, our keyholder event has featured a pioneer in women's issues, a leader we've invited to inspire and guide our community's efforts to promote economic security for women. This year, we realized that the inspiring leader for this moment is you. Each of you holds the key to unlocking potential for every woman in Central Texas. I invite you all to join us on October 6th as we kick off this work with an online workshop on responsive and equitable grant making, specifically designed to revise our funding policies and processes through an equity lens. Together, we'll explore the impact the pandemic has had on the nonprofit sector and imagine ways in which we can craft our grants review process to better meet today's community needs. It will be an opportunity to re-envision our funding priorities while building on lessons learned from previous grant cycles. We want you to come with hard questions and to challenge long-held practices, like why don't we fund advocacy work, and why do we only fund programs? The questions you bring and the conversations we have will chart our future course. The content of the workshop will be centered on racial equity, and the outcome will be a blueprint that our grants leadership can operationalize, resulting in a transformation of our review process for our 2021 grants cycle. With the newly envisioned process in place, we will then host a series of strategy labs throughout October and November, organized around our 4 pillars: housing, childcare, education, and health. Much like those we held 3 years ago, the labs are facilitated workshops that help us refine and focus our funding strategies. The strategic direction crafted 3 years ago powered much more focused and effective funding. And the goal of the labs this fall is to center funding strategies on racial equity and respond to our current economic and health environment. They will also bear the distinctive heartbeats of those involved, marked with the collective imprint of your guidance, wisdom, and passion. We're looking forward to a busy and rewarding fall and can't wait to launch this renewed endeavor with you. So please join us. Check your email in the future and the Foundation's website next month for more information. Sign up and invite your friends. And now for today's centerpiece. The panel discussions we've hosted this summer have really helped us better understand the pandemic's impact on our community. And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation on childcare. I'm delighted to introduce Yvette Ruiz, who will be moderating today's conversation. Yvette is the Vice President of Nonprofit Engagement for JP Morgan Chase, which is a proud sponsor of both the Austin Community Foundation's signature programs, the Hispanic Impact Fund and the Women's Fund. She's also a new mom to her young son, and so I'm sure this topic is near and dear to her heart. Yvette, thank you. I'm so glad you could join us for today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Jane. It's been such a pleasure getting to work with you a little bit more in this process. And thank you to the Community Foundation for asking me to moderate this conversation. We have been having these conversations for a long time, and it only took a global pandemic to get the country really start talking about something every working parent is well familiar with: the lack of affordable and quality childcare. According to the Women's Fund most recent report, quality childcare is out of reach for many Central Texans. Even for a middle-income family of 4 with a toddler and an infant, childcare can consume 27% of their total annual earnings, often costing more than food or rent. I'll let that sit with you for a second. This paints a picture of why nearly 70% of non-working middle school parents cite childcare as one of their top 5 reasons for not participating in the workforce. And that was before the pandemic. And this doesn't even take into account the scarcity of quality rated centers that provide subsidies to those families most in need. For any parent trying to understand childcare options, if you're lucky to have them, it's a difficult landscape to navigate, which is why I'm so glad that we are joined by some incredible women on the call today who are experts in this field and are working tirelessly to change the conversation and opportunities available for women. Now, before jumping right in, I want to go over one quick housekeeping item before we start. I know we are all pretty familiar with video conferencing these days, so I'll keep this part relatively short. We'll be taking questions at the end of the discussion, and I'm sadly here to inform you that Alanis Morissette and her very cute toddler won't actually be on the call today, but this screenshot does illustrate how to participate in our Q&A and the general state for most working parents these days. So just as a quick reminder, everyone is muted, so please submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Make sure that all participants is selected in the drop-down window so that we can all see it. And I know this is a lively discussion, so if you guys want to plus up anything that you hear during Dr. Mason's words or during the panel discussion, feel free to be active in the chat feature. I'd love to see your thoughts and get some real-time feedback, as that, as you know, is a little challenging on webinars. Perfect. So I am looking forward to your participation in our Q&A, and I'm delighted that today we will be talking to community leaders and experts that understand the role high quality, reliable, and affordable childcare can play for families. Both the Women's Fund and Hispanic Impact Fund take a data-driven and community-led approach to our grant making. And I'm delighted that we have the national perspectives of national researchers and local nonprofit provider, all dedicated to supporting families during this pandemic and beyond. These community leaders know that women cannot achieve economic security without affordable, quality, and reliable childcare. And I'm very happy to introduce to you these incredible professionals. Dr. Mason. Dr. C. Nicole Mason is the president and CEO of the Institute for Women's Policy Research. As one of the nation's foremost intersectional researchers and scholars, she has spearheaded research on issues related to economic security, poverty, women's issues, and racial equity. She is also the author of Born Bright, a young girl's journey from nothing to something in America, and has written hundreds of articles on women and economic security. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Mason.
Glad to be here.
Cristina Golasso joins us today from Todos Juntos, a 2-gen family learning center she founded over 11 years ago and serves as the agency's executive director. Todos Juntos supports family education by providing high-quality early childhood education, adult ESL instruction, and culturally appropriate parenting and life skills. I'm also very proud to say that Cristina Golasso is a founder supporting communities of color led by people of color, a founder of an organization led by a person of color supporting communities of color. As we know, organizations that are led by people of color are incredibly important because they have the social competency and awareness to serve those most critical. So thank you so much for being here, Cristina.
Thank you.
And Sheila Ferris is the Child Care Director for Mariposa Family Learning Center, a 2-generation educational center in Montopolis neighborhood of Southeast Austin. Mariposa actually just opened it up full-time in January for 3-year-olds. What a crazy first year. I can't imagine how nimble you've had to be, Sheila, in this process. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. I seem to be having some technical difficulties. Give me. I'm so sorry about that. Dr. Mason, can you just give me a thumbs up that you can hear and see me? Yes, thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I'd love to start asking you a quick question about some of the work the Institute has published on breadwinner mothers during COVID-19. At the national level, how are you seeing breadwinner mothers being impacted by the pandemic, and who is considered a breadwinner mother?
So thank you for having me be a part of this really important conversation. And I'm really excited to hear from Cristina and Sheila as well. And for those of you who don't know us, the Institute for Women's Policy Research is the nation's preeminent think tank focused on winning women's economic equity and building the power and influence of women, working women in society and in the halls of power. So recently we did a report looking at the impact of COVID-19 on breadwinner mothers and the emerging childcare crisis as a result of the pandemic. So as many of you know, at the start of the pandemic, the unemployment rate for women was around 4%. By March, the unemployment rate for women was around 14%, and for Black and Latina women, the numbers were slightly higher. And the other thing that's really important to know in terms of providing context for this discussion we're going to have on childcare and breadwinner mothers is that women were disproportionately impacted by job losses during COVID-19. About 60% of those jobs lost were women, and a good number of them were women of color, Black, Latina, and single mothers, so earning less than $40,000 a year. And in this context are considered essential workers, meaning they must leave their homes in order to provide services and also to get paid. So basically, if you don't go to work, you don't get paid. And many of these jobs are lower wage jobs, meaning that families, many of whom were single mothers, were struggling before the pandemic and struggling to make ends meet. And so the pandemic has only exacerbated that. So when we think about who are breadwinner mothers and what does that mean in this context when we're thinking about COVID-19, there are about 15 million breadwinner mothers responsible for children under the age of 18. Breadwinner mothers are mothers whose income constitute 40% of all household incomes. And so Black women are majority, 4 out of 5 Black women are breadwinner mothers, and many of them are single mothers. So what that means, especially during this pandemic, is that the income of mothers, families depend on that income to be able to make ends meet, to pay for housing, food, to get through this economic downturn. And so because women have been disproportionately impacted by job loss, it means that those workers, those households lose that vital income. And we know that many of these families were already living paycheck to paycheck. And so when we layer on issues related to childcare, it becomes even more precarious for those working mothers. And many women, as you said, Yvette, at the top of the presentation, are really having to make some tough choices between, being able to provide childcare for their families and also go to work. And so for some families, it's just really an impossible situation, especially for working single mothers.
Right, you're having to make the decision you never want to make, which is
you never want to make, and it's actually really an impossible decision. And Latino mothers, just by the way, because especially as a result of the pandemic, are also considered essential workers. In a recent survey, many Latino moms have said, I'm contemplating leaving the workforce because these managing childcare as well as a job that's not very flexible or I have to show up to. It's just really impossible. And so what we know COVID has exposed is that we had a care infrastructure that was broken in the first place. Like you said, 27% of families spend their income on childcare, and for single moms and single women head of households, it could be even more, especially if you have multiple, small children. And so when we think about breadwinner mothers, I just wanted to say, by the way, Texas has about 48% of households that are considered breadwinner mothers, meaning 40% of their income goes to providing for their families. And so these numbers are high across the board, across the country. But when you think about women, families in Texas, the number is also really significantly high. And so making sure those women and those mothers not only have the supports that they need for care, but as we talk about what does a full economic recovery look like, making sure that they're not only able to re-enter the workforce, but are able to stay there, and care is a really critical piece of that puzzle.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this access to childcare, particularly around the pandemic, it disproportionately affects our low-income families and low-income mothers specifically, but the issue is not specific to low income. I think everyone across the board is finding it incredibly difficult to suddenly become the family, I mean, women were already the family everything, but now it's very specifically children home. You don't have access to childcare. You have to be the teacher. You have to be an employee. You have to be X, Y, and Z. And it's incredibly difficult to be successful at any one of those things at any given time, but especially now since we have little ones now at home. I'd like to turn my attention to Christina and Sheila a little bit, just to see, Dr. Mason has very beautifully laid out what the national landscape is with some Texas data points on the breadwinner mother. I'm curious to see how this experience and how her context lands locally here in Austin, specifically with your two childcare centers. Christina, Todos Juntos has been at this work for a very long time. Would love to hear your thoughts on what your clients' biggest obstacles and needs are right now.
Yeah. So the average Todos Juntos client has a slightly different story or experience in that it's still difficult, definitely, in regards to this pandemic, and just different in that the families we work with are typically single income households. If mom does work, she's not typically the breadwinner, but if she does work, it's often in the service industry or other entrepreneurial opportunities such as making and selling food or home cleaning. For those that do work outside of the home, though, they have definitely seen job loss and reduced work, which creates a whole list of other challenges. Regardless, though, the burden of surviving through this pandemic definitely falls on our moms. Just women in general, we're all feeling that. For our families, it includes maintaining the home, supporting their children, supporting their spouses, trying to keep everyone safe, especially when their spouses likely work in the labor industry, and then also supporting their kids learning online, which adds additional obstacles that even some of us might feel. Todos Juntos moms are still learning English. They're still developing their digital literacy skills, and they may or may not have the adequate tools and resources for digital connection. That presents a whole other set of challenges. As a working mother myself, I speak English. I went to college. I mostly know how to navigate systems. It's hard for me. But when you layer the non-English speaking component on top of all of that, it's a lot. And our moms are amazing. They're superheroes. They're doing this work. They're juggling all of it. They're navigating complex systems so that they can access much needed resources for their families. And they're doing all of that through a pandemic, and sometimes with really limited English and resources. And it's just a lot. It's a lot.
It is. It is a lot. Sheila, I'd love to hear your thoughts and perspectives. And Mariposa obviously is a little bit newer to town. You are not new to this space at all. You've had a couple of months in operation in person, and then you've had to pivot. What are you seeing in terms of needs and obstacles for your clients? Sheila?
Hello. Yeah, we're really, really small. We still have only 4 enrolled, and we actually only operated for 7 weeks before the March 13th closure in the stay-at-home order. So we're still working with those same families, and what I've seen just anecdotally is really interesting. When a family has so little money, there are certain things that they have more flexibility around. They have different avenues of earning money, and they're used to dealing with so little that they have actually more threads that they can pull to kind of keep it together. That's not to say that they should be struggling the way they are, but I've been surprised that there hasn't been, among specifically just the families that I have connection with, loss of place to stay, or just more devastation. Really, I was ready for just things to really completely fall apart for people. Now, the stress of getting all of this done, and my family's also English, every single one, English is their second language. I have a beautiful staff of people who are helping me to be really responsive and also helping me learn Spanish as we go. But what I've also talked to other daycare directors in the zip code we're in, which is 78741, and they were telling me that their full-time employed parents were the ones who were the first people back at school, because if their jobs didn't have the flexibility of being remote and they have bills to pay, that cannot be put off, they were the first ones who were bringing their children back to preschool. And our families are back in school now. We opened August 4th, but we're finding that even of the 4 that we have enrolled, they are not coming every day. And one of our families decided not to come last week. And we've been Zooming that child into our circle times every day. And he wants to come back so badly that actually that's prompted mom to say, okay, I'm ready to go get a job. And then once I have a job, I'll be comfortable bringing him back.
Yeah, it's tough. Even if childcare, so in Austin, for context, I think a lot of childcare centers closed, some stayed open and did the best that they could in kind of navigating the moving target of the healthcare department making rules for childcare centers. And so it's been interesting, even parents who have had access to childcare making that very personal decision of, I need the help, but am I putting my job before my child's health by putting them in childcare? And I've had some people say, you know, this is a mental health decision. You know, my family, we need to be able to put our kid into childcare simply because the stress of all of this has become too much, and we can't do work and we can't parent and do all those things at the same time. So I think this pandemic has certainly highlighted an already bad situation for our families from a health and economic inequality perspective specifically. As we know, the families and people of color in Austin struggle to find economic success, and this has not been an easy weather for anyone to weather, an easy storm for anyone to weather, excuse me. Dr. Mason, you do this work every single day and you speak to many folks about these particular issues. How does your own work and your own research inform the work that you do specifically, but then also on the other side of that, I mean, philanthropy has a role to play here. We can't fund our way out of this problem, but certainly there are other players that can help support and prop up these systems. I'd love to hear your perspective on how to balance both of those things.
So that's right. So I think we all have a role to play, and you know, again, unfortunately, what we've seen is that it's been, you know, just a perfect storm of different things. So there's a health crisis, there's an economic crisis, there's a care crisis, and all those things are making it hard for families who were already vulnerable and on the margins of many systems. Even, you know, it's exacerbated their economic vulnerability. And so when I think about what can be done, you know, I think philanthropy does have a role to play in supporting, you know, great organizations who are on the front lines doing this work and supporting families. I think employers have a role to play, and there, you know, there's employers, you know, I've been talking about this for some time. I said, you know, the employers have gone out of their way to make sure that millennials feel really welcome in the workplace. Like, what do millennials like? They like to dress casually. They like to, you know, have snacks and, you know, those bouncy balls in the office. But women make up 50% of the workforce, and we haven't done enough to make sure that they're comfortable, that they're able to come to work and perform without worrying about care in their families, and making sure that we're accommodating them in the workplace. And this care crisis has sort of put that into focus and say, okay, what's happening here? It's not just about individual families, it's about a whole system that's broken, and it's about employers who haven't stepped up to the plate to support working moms in significant ways. And so I think it's time that we really start to hold employers accountable for their practices and what they're not doing to support working mothers in the workforce.
Absolutely.
And then also,
I was just plussing that up. Yes.
Yeah, and even here at IWPR, for example, because we have a number of working moms here, and we're fortunate that we're able to work from home. But I can tell you, you know, I have 10-year-old twins, and you know, was working, you know, 40, 50 hours a week, and I tell you, something had to give, and I tell you what, the schooling fell by the wayside, unfortunately, by the way. But that shouldn't be the case. And so we, for example, as an employer said, okay, well, we're going to provide a child care subsidy, so families can provide, so we can provide supplemental support for families, for working moms. And that's, it's a small gesture, but it also gives parents more flexibility. And as an employer, I think that it's my responsibility, especially if I'm expecting people to show up to work. And those sorts of things I think employers could really do and take seriously. And at the federal level, obviously, we need more supports and childcare supports and subsidies. And I love what's happening, the conversations around basic, these economic impact payments, and think they should be extended for families and based on need. There's so many things we could be doing at both the state and federal levels. And so, so I'm thinking about what families can do and the kind of supports and agencies that, agencies like Mariposa and Todos Juntos together, many agencies like that, and philanthropy, we all have a role to play, I think, here.
Absolutely. So this is the question, so just to kind of build on that, thank you so much, Dr. Mason. Sheila and Christina, weaving, kind of pulling out this thread of advocacy, how do you feel like you have to advocate for your organization? And understanding advocacy sometimes gets conflated with lobbying. I'm not asking about lobbying activity. You're a nonprofit organization, right? So when you think about advocacy for your constituents and advocacy for your work and advocacy within philanthropy, even to get your point across and receive funding for the work that you're doing, how do you do that? How do you advocate for your clients and your organization, either at the policy level or the philanthropic level?
So, like everyone has mentioned, the inequities, they've always been in place. COVID has just made it nearly impossible for the greater community to safely look away now. Todos Juntos, for almost 12 years, we have worked really hard to make sure that all of our services are delivered in a culturally responsive way, but that they're at no cost to our families. We try our hardest to make sure our systems and our processes do not create further obstacles and barriers, which can just really add and mount the frustrations that our families have felt for years, if not their whole lives. For us, this means that we have to collaborate with countless partners to provide all the needed resources and supplemental services. Instead of us recreating the wheel, we don't try to do things alone. We try to partner where we can and in meaningful ways. And because of COVID, we have to be even more flexible, more culturally responsive, and more collaborative than ever before. That means finding a right partner to provide food boxes for our families, partnering with organizations like El Buen or the Family Independence Initiative to increase our financial assistance fund. We had never had a financial assistance fund before this, but we had surveyed families at the beginning of March to determine what the anticipated impact would be. So that allowed us to reach out to different partners in the community. And for me, direct cash assistance to families makes the most sense right now. It helps to make up for lost and reduced income. We've done that. We've worked with local pediatricians to help inform families, get them the right information at the right time. And it's a constant, it's a vicious cycle, right? And so direct cash assistance for me is, we originally had done that through Family Independence Initiative and then the RISE Fund. But what I've really seen is just how funding partners can really help influence, really help improve the fragmented social services systems that perpetuate the very issues and obstacles that they exist to counter. And funders hold economic strengths that small organizations like mine do not have. And so they can often be more influential. They can lead by example by requiring flexibility and more family-friendly approaches, such as, again, direct cash assistance. I'm sorry, I'm going to plug it the whole time, to families, or promoting and supporting collaboratives that support the whole family, because it's not just kids who need support, it's their parents who need the support as well. If we expect families to be caregivers, providers, and now teachers, then they must be able to meet their family's most basic needs. And so, yeah, again, one more thing, direct cash assistance. One thing I do want to say is I also think funders can lead by example where our undocumented community is concerned, because they have been intentionally restricted from accessing any federal assistance. And so funders for our organization have played a critical role in this, in helping support those families. It's having hard conversations, really, and transparent conversations.
Yep, I hear you. Sheila, kind of pivoting over to you a little bit, or not full focus on you. Mariposa Family Learning Center was founded with many hopes and dreams, but this was an important project identified for the Austin City Lutherans. Can you share a little bit more about the role the Montopolis community played in realizing this dream, understanding that community needs and community voice is very important when doing community-based work. And oftentimes, if you are not of and from that particular neighborhood, there's some tricky politics to navigate there. Can you share a little bit about that?
I was actually not around for a lot of the ACL work that went into actually getting all the pieces in place to get the preschool started. So some of the details I don't have. I know that when Austin City Lutherans was founded, the first thing they did was the nutrition program, and it was focused on the east side. And they had a church on the east side, which actually just is up the street from me. And it was called Prince of Peace. And that's now since been torn down. But that was where their first nutrition program was. That's where their first food pantry was. And at that church, they had a meeting when they felt strong enough as an organization. They wanted to expand their services. And they had a brainstorming session, and it came up that continued nutrition support and also childcare were the main things that everybody in the organization really could get behind. And because they were already doing the food pantry in 78741, they did some research and found out that actually the zip code also needed quality childcare that was affordable.
Yeah. So and that, go ahead.
No, that's.
Well, so that leads, so I'm monitoring the questions in the Q&A, and Dr. Mason, I want to come back to you really quickly on a policy question, but Sheila, you just touched on something really important. Sustainability of child care centers right now is definitely in flux with families not sending their kids in or not having the resources to pay tuition, even though their students aren't attending. We are seeing the potential of child care center closures. And the question that I see from Jennifer Long, and this is open for the panel, there are child care deserts in our region where little to no affordable care is available, but do you anticipate child care centers closing as a result of the pandemic? And then what happens then to those folks who are already in a hard place? That's an open question for all three of you.
So can I start to provide a little context? So I sit on a board. I'm on the board for an organization that's it's a provider organization, All Our Kin in Connecticut. And so I'm thinking about the ways in which the child care industry and workers and families who attend those centers have been directly impacted as a part of COVID. And it's been actually devastating. COVID has been devastating to the sector. And so while we are the recovery is slow, and we've begun some replacement of jobs as the shutdown, stay-at-home orders have been lifted, but childcare, the sector jobs, is still down 25%. And because many childcare centers were already working on very small margins, so there wasn't a lot of cushion, and many of the centers that we surveyed said they couldn't last more than a couple of weeks or a month without having children attend, because there is no cushion. We all know that some of these jobs are lower wage and lower paying jobs, and so providers were really before the pandemic really scraping by, and so it's just a bad situation. And when you think about, the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Sheila, when you think about families returning to, you say, okay, it's time for everyone to get back to work, women specifically. If there's no childcare, the centers are closed, the daycare, like what are we going to do? What do you expect moms to do? Those spots have disappeared, and we all know, just like you talk about here, that there were already some childcare deserts, or wait lists were extremely long, and so it's just a very impossible, broken situation for families, but also just a broken system. And so there were some questions around, well, what can be done, or what should philanthropy do? So specifically, investing and doing some work around building the childcare infrastructure directly, but also at the policy level. And I don't want to say the word advocacy, but doing some public education around, what the system looks like now, and what we imagine as a working system, a system that works for families looks like. And I just want to say, Christina, one of the things I wrote down was this idea of direct cash payments to families. Childcare is just one of the issues many families are facing. Housing insecurity, food insecurity are also intersecting issues. And so what families need right now are funds. They need money, especially when we just saw the $600 in supplemental payments sort of disappear, which has left many families push them over a cliff, by the way. So, so it's just, there's a lot, I think, there's a big role for philanthropy to play across the board.
So I think the statistic that I read from the city of Austin, or from the United Way in Austin, was that it's projected about half of the city's daycares will end up closing. And I mean, back to the advocacy too, this is a long time coming. When America decided that 2 incomes were better than 1, the American economy decided that, that's more money for the people in charge, more money for landlords, more money for credit card companies and banks, more money for the top, because there was more money in the workforce. But when we did that, we didn't step in with someone else to raise our children. And that's what we're talking about. What we're talking about is someone has to raise our children if we're going to go to work. And now it's not optional. So I've been a single parent for 17 years, and I could give you all the different things I've done. I've been really flexible. I've been really, really poor. Luckily, it just so happened that I am at the end of situational poverty, and I have this job and the gracious board that's continued to pay us. But one of my good friends is a director at another church center. They've been actually operating, I think, for the last 40 years. They just decided to close. Yeah. They had 25 children. They had a staff of 12. And you're already talking about people who, depending on the center, these women who, I know there was one woman who'd worked there for 15 years, and she was making $15 an hour, and she didn't have benefits, and now she has no job, and there's not another daycare job out there for her to go snap up right now. Right. So my advocacy personally starts with the children. The children have to be children, and they have to go through that process in order to grow up. Also think, okay.
I'm sorry, we just have to, I think you're right. We have to remember that at our core, we are talking about childcare centers and childcare centers as employers, but we are talking about our children, our children who are our future, are like our precious little babies who can't advocate for themselves. And so we have to do that for them. And we have to provide safe quality options for them to be able to thrive while parents are working. I couldn't agree more. Pivoting a little bit, we've talked a lot about access and how that access actually is constantly in flux in the pandemic with openings and closures or permanent closures. Christina, quality childcare is just as, if not more important. Can you share a little bit about how your work is dedicated to high quality early childhood education?
Yeah, so Todos Juntos is a dual gen model, a dual generation model. It's unique in that way that it supports parents and kids together at the same time from the same family through education. We're not a traditional full-day childcare provider. We're a collaborative between parents and teachers. Parents are on site learning English, developing other skills like workforce skills, technology, digital literacy. And while they're doing that, their kids are down the hall learning English, also getting ready for school. And so for us, quality it entails a couple of different things. So first, it means a quality work experience for our team. Like we're all talking about, childcare workers are really undervalued. And for us, it's important to create a quality work experience for our team because families are entrusting their children to them. It's important for our teachers to feel checked in, to feel supported, valued. And so for us, it's important to compensate them fairly and about 50% more than the average rate for childcare providers, but also keeping in mind that we do have a shorter day. It also means that teachers, we've created a culture where we promote family first. If we promote that for the families we serve, then we promote it as well for the staff that works for us. And so if a teacher has to bring their kiddo to work, then that's acceptable. Next, for us, we really prioritize a culturally responsive approach to supporting the parents and children that we work with. Shared lived experiences matter tremendously in creating meaningful and trust-based relationships. And when a family trusts you, they confide in you. They're more likely to reach out when they need support. And for us, we really believe that school readiness, that entails every child having an adult in their lives who has the confidence and knowledge to advocate for them and navigate the community and school systems with them. And then finally, quality for us means using research-based curriculums and programs, curriculums that are supported by, United Way, Texas Workforce Commission, promoting literacy by using daily reading volunteers and programs like Raising a Reader, which provide our kids with 4 books a week, or also leaning on organizations like United Way for guidance when needed. And then most recently, we hired an early childhood ed consultant to help us, to help inform our online transition this fall, as well as our licensing process. But above all, doing all of these things is important to do it together with cultural sensitivity. Keeping that cultural responsiveness is important.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm starting to dig in a little bit into the Q&A. So for the audience that has any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So while I know that there are many questions, you guys type away. I've got one for Dr. Mason. It kind of builds a little bit on the question that Misty asked here, which is, it likely is too early to shed light on data about women in the workplace and whether or not women are actually leaving the workforce due to lack of childcare. But to piggyback on that a little bit, Dr. Mason, I'd like to think about other contributing factors here, like paid family and sick leave, closing the gender gap, et cetera. I know that the Institute has focused a little bit on this via your policy recommendations. Can you share a little bit about how your policy recommendations would help women better support their family and access childcare?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So in thinking about, what can be done, or thinking about, I am actually, so as you know, people are like 2020 is like the worst, like the worst year ever. And I think, was completely unexpected, but I also think that this is a really great moment of opportunity for us, because it's sort of like an awakening, because I think we would have kept going on the same way. We would have not been thinking about our care infrastructure, our health infrastructure, our economy, and the impact it has on lower wage workers had this not happened. Because, so it just really provides us an opportunity to push some of those policies that have seemed like pie in the sky, that because of the pandemic are on the table for consideration. And so policies like higher and living wages for families is on the table. Universal basic income is on the table. Things that in January people said was possible. But hey, guess what? Looks like the federal government can send checks to everyone, you know? So that's on the table as a possibility. You know, extended paid sick leave and family leave, so that if a family member is sick, you can take care of them. Hey, guess what? If you can't go to work because you have to provide care for your family, you can also tap into unemployment insurance. Again, something that seemed like crazy town just in January. So when I think about the recommendations, you know, obviously making sure that childcare is affordable and accessible for families and it's high quality is also really critically important. You know, like you said, paid sick and family leave. But some of the things that seemed, you know, radical, I think we should start thinking about, even, you know, for families. I am unhappy around the way undocumented folks have been excluded from many of these relief policies and efforts. And so we have a long way to go in terms of making sure that everyone, these policies are inclusive and representative. And, you know, hopefully when things shift in a few months, hopefully, we'll get to a place where we can think holistically about the most vulnerable communities and how we make sure that everyone is recovering evenly, and nobody gets left behind.
Awesome. So we are about to hit the top of the hour. We've got 8 minutes left. We do have a couple of conclusionary type remarks, but before that, I will have one rapid fire question that I want each of you to answer as quickly as possible, which is, if philanthropy were the silver bullet, what would you fund?
Yeah.
So for me, if I could had all the money right now, I would go out and buy every family a tech device, or all tech devices for everybody that needs it, hotspots, pay for their internet. I really believe internet should be like a universal thing. High in the sky, a big old center where we could do everything on one site together.
Okay. Okay. Sheila.
Yeah, a center that is as beautiful as possible, as comfortable for everyone. Families want to be there. They want to spend time there. Children love to come there every day.
Okay.
And I would say direct payments to families, like emergency subsidies to families in this moment, especially families who haven't been able to tap into federal support and state aid.
Right, right. So for those interested on how philanthropy can immediately respond, it is money into the hands of the families who need it the most, capacity building for a center that is beautiful and welcoming, and also maybe some advocacy on internet as a utility, but also making sure that technology is widely available to families who are obviously distance learning, but technology, as we know, wasn't essential before the pandemic. So thank you for answering that. I know we've just tapped the surface of this conversation, and we can certainly go for much longer, but unfortunately we are at the end of our hour. So I know that it's a little bit difficult to kind of give applause, but thank you so much, Dr. Mason, Sheila Ferris, and Christina Colasso, for your time this afternoon. We so appreciate you spending the afternoon with us. It is afternoon, yes, the afternoon, or an hour with us. So thank you so much. I wish I could like have applause pipe in, but you'll just get me.
Thank you.
Can I get a kudo out really quickly?
Sure.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to our funding partners, specifically the Women's Fund. I think they've been incredible. I feel right now, through this time of crisis, it really just has felt like our funders are in the trenches with us, and really trying to meet us where we're at. And so I just wanted to say thank you so much for the flexibility, the compassion.
Yeah, we feel that too at Mariposa, for sure.
Awesome. So thank you again. I'm excited. I feel like this was a really tangible conversation for the Women's Fund leadership to kind of go back and take a look at how this information might inform the next grant cycle, which, as Jane mentioned at the top of the hour, is just around the corner. I'm sure you all feel the same way, and we hope to see you again on October 6th when we are hosting a workshop on responsive and equitable grant making. You'll all be receiving the invite from the foundation, but be sure to save the date now. It's very easy, October 6th. Sign up for the ACF's e-newsletter if you haven't already subscribed. We want to make sure that everyone has access to this transformational workshop. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and be well.